seem to do well. But I think when you look at our track record, we're nationally recognized as being one of the states that do a good job during the audit process and during the interview process. I know that in the interview list this year, there's some people with a lot of experience. There's people that have been interviewed before, and there's people that have never been interviewed and maybe have less experience with a department. I just want to say it'll be okay. And no matter what happens, if you're nervous, if you're not, it'll be okay. Everything will be fine. We'll get through it. There's a couple things that I want to point out, and I think you need to hear me say it. It's absolutely okay to say, I don't know, if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it. I would always prefer you say, I don't know, than you guess. And we have had instances where people guess, and then we have to clean that up, and we clean it up. But if you don't know, just say, I don't know. Always be honest. Don't try to bend it. Don't try to trick people. Just be honest and answer the question. And the last thing for me is this is really an opportunity to try to be positive about the department. I used to joke with people that this isn't the time to say you don't like your cubicle or you need a new chair. This is the time to talk about the things the department does that are good. Clearly, if they ask you a question and the answer is not good, you just heard me. My second rule is be honest. So be honest, but try not to be disparaging about the department. If you have a concern, you probably should talk to your supervisor, or call me. But generally, the audit is questions about our policies and our procedures and how the work happens. Let me say one other thing. If during this process, all the way up till the day that you're having your interview, you have a question or concern, you are more than welcome, encouraged to call Eric, to call Pete, to call Kathleen Tulin. Pick up the phone and call me. I'll help you as much as I can, and we'll get through this together. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to email me, feel free to call me. But at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Eric to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Pete. So we have a good bit of information to cover. This is more a review as opposed to in-depth presentation. The agenda today is going to include the history of these audits. We're going to touch on the 2019 finalized audit. We're going to talk about the current 2020 self-assessment, which has been completed and sent out statewide. We're going to just touch on a bit about pre-audit activities. There's a lot that Federal Highway has been doing to prepare themselves, and we're going to go a little bit into what those activities have been and are. We're going to cover what's happening during the audit when they actually arrive. Well, they're not arriving on site. They're going to do everything virtually, but when they actually conduct the interviews that week of September 21st. Then we're going to talk about what happens post-audit after the interviews are done and Federal Highway gets into the report drafting phase and the activities that go with that. Interviewing preparations, Pete's going to give you all some guidance on specifically how you can prepare for the interviews and some helpful information. And then we're going to close it out. Next slide. So basically, these audits have been going on since 2017 with the initial start of NEPA, the NEPA program in this state. The 2020 audit, the focus topics are environmental certifications, authorizations, permitting, project reviews, and process improvements. Some of you, quite a few of you have the districts, not you particularly who are on the interview list, but the districts have been contacted regarding some of the topics because Federal Highway is in the process of going through files and project files, and they have questions and they share that with OEM, and we reach out to the districts as we need to. For the 2019, the focus topics were environmental documentation, which that's kind of a theme throughout all of the audits. They have always looked at project files and come up with findings on documentation. The funding authorizations, interchange access request policy, and emergency repairs. That report was finally published in June of 2020. The findings, there were 9 successful practices and 1 non-compliance observation relating to project documentation. Next slide. For the 2018, excuse me, the focus topics were Endangered Species Act, essential fish habitat, commitments, and environmental documentation. And the findings included 16 successful practices, 2 observations on essential ESA and on commitments, 1 non-compliance on environmental documentation. The 2017 report, the focus topics were planning, consistency, QA/QC, section 106, protected species and habitat, and environmental documentation. And then the findings were 13 successful practices, 3 observations on commitment documentation, program level coordination with Federal Highway and QA/QC, and 1 non-compliance on project file documentation. Next slide. So now we're going to go just touch a little bit on the 2019 audit, which was the most recent complete audit that was conducted in the final report issue. So for that, they did have 1 non-compliance observation, and that specifically was about insufficient file documentation. And the finding in the report highlighted that OEM and FDOT has worked actively with Federal Highway to resolve their project level findings and the documentation that they identified. And we have resolved all those issues. And some of the resolutions included that, we were going to do enhancements to our system and training or policy changes where we needed to. For the non-compliance observations from previous audits, the Federal Highway reported a non-compliance in 2017, audit number 1, non-compliance in 2018, audit number 2. And the update on that is in the 2019 report, they cited that we had, in fact, resolved all of those previous non-compliance audit findings from those previous audit reports. And again, they cited that, we agreed through enhancements and any training or policy changes to follow up to make sure that those issues were resolved. Next slide. So for 2019, the successful practices, there were 9, and just kind of to briefly touch on those, they indicated, they cited our self-assessment process as being a strong process and the way we do corrective actions, of course, communications with the districts, the fact that we do have designated staff in OEM that communicates on an ongoing basis with each district and is assigned thusly, and we have ongoing contacts with our subject matter experts and consultants. They cited SWEP, several things that we've done in SWEP in terms of enhancements, and the tool is a significant QA/QC tool to help us improve our documentation and to ensure, as you all in the districts conduct your reviews and input your information, that what needs to be part of the project file development is there. And of course, using our review record system as kind of a work paper type system where we do our comments and we are able to go back and make sure that we've looked at documentation and we've commented appropriately, and the back and forth that goes with that. Next slide. So there are 4 additional successful practices. Of course, we have a rigorous process relating to legal sufficiency. We do have a form within SWEP that helps us with that process. So that was cited as a successful practice. They cited our training. We have a very rigorous and comprehensive training program. As you all know, the training modules are constantly put out there. We have all of them posted at our OEM website as part of the FDOT website. And we also, when we complete webinars and go-to meetings of this nature, we record and we post that as well. So they cited that as a successful practice. And now we have videos on YouTube, and our YouTube channel has filled up in terms of the different courses that we offer are posted there. So that's a successful practice that they highlighted. And then the last thing is the interchange access requests, the projects, the procedures that we have to ensure that those projects are included in the NEPA review. And they cited that as a successful practice. Next slide. So kind of the wrap up, the history and kind of the 2019 audit report. We, meaning you all out in the districts and around the state, as well as working with OEM, the staff and management here, we've all done just an absolutely great job over the years, and we're very appreciative. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2020 self-assessment. That is one of the places that they look for questions that they're going to be asking you all. So we're going to touch on so you have information, and we've been sharing that final report as well. So for the self-assessment 2020 target topics, we looked at cooperating agency coordination, tribal coordination, biological opinion commitment, sign and seal engineering documents, and the federal highway audit and self-assessment finding updates. Next slide. The findings, we had 3 successful practices. The practices basically were dealt with the coordination with cooperating agencies and coordination with the tribes. We also had 9 opportunities for improvement, and the opportunities for improvement basically went over policy and procedure changes that we needed to do within PD&E, ensuring that proper documentation for the tribes, tribal coordination gets to OEM, and there's that working between the districts, communication between the districts and OEM. Next slide. And there were several other opportunities for improvement, but we're going to send the detailed information to you after this presentation. So the 2020 performance results, as part of the MOU, we're required to have performance measures. There are 4 basic measures. We've been tracking them from day one. We developed metrics so that we could actually bring those 4 measures to life. The metrics have come to about 14 specific metrics. And what you see in front of you is that overall we've done, i.e. you all have done an outstanding job. We've met or exceeded all of our metrics with the exception of the DI1 metric, which is the efficiency and timeliness. And we actually have come within 1 percentage point of achieving that. The goal, the target is 25%, and we achieved 24%. So that's the way we categorize these, green is meet or exceeds. Yellow is kind of a watch area, but not an urgent area needing change or in some kind of action. And then red means that we do need to look at it closer and perhaps initiate some action. So this is in the yellow area, and we're pretty sure that we continue to do well. Last year we actually had green in this area because we've done an outstanding job with improving the timeliness of how long it takes to do these projects and the efficiency in that regard. Next slide. So the next section is about the 2020 pair and project reviews. These, again, are two areas that Federal Highway has looked at in advance of conducting the interviews, and areas where they likely will take questions from as they prepare to talk to you all. Next slide. So for the 2020 pair, and pair stands for Preliminary Audit Information Request. They've done that for all of the 4 years that they've conducted these audits, and it's just a bunch of questions they give us of things that they want to know about our program and processes, and we have to respond to them. This year we didn't have so many questions. We had 25. Last year we had a little bit less. The year before we had a whole lot of questions. So this year the questions basically dealt with the program elements of program management, documentation, QA/QC, legal sufficiency, training, and performance measures. That is actually the way they organize their findings into these categories, and that's the way they have organized the pair questions. And we have, of course, responded, provided them with the 2020 pair responses. I believe that happened right on or right before August 21st. The pair themes or focus areas for this year were environmental permits and process improvements. Environmental permits is the reason why a lot of staff who work with our permitting process are being interviewed. Some of you may not have been interviewed or been actively involved with NEPA except for this aspect of it. And so that's why we go through a process of preparing everybody and providing information that would be helpful. And the process improvements, we've done a comprehensive job of looking at all of the updates and all of the enhancements, the trainings, and the policy changes that have been attached to audit findings and self-assessment findings since 2017. The very first ones were done over the last 4 years. And we've compiled a list of those and included those as part of our self-assessment. So that's kind of that part of it. And that information has now been provided to Federal Highway. Next slide. So the project file review, just basically, we provided comments to Federal Highway in July. Federal Highway provided their comments to us in July. We responded in August. They've given us, and before their actual deadline, I think their deadline was the 21st, and we responded on the 18th with authorizations, and then on the 21st with everything else. Federal Highway had 41 initial observations on 33 categorical exclusions, which included type 1s and type 2s and reavals. And the topics included class of action, essential fish habitat, fiscal constraint, noise, and section 106 documentation. Next slide. So the performance measures that I mentioned earlier, again, these are measures that are in the MOU. We are required to do them. We're required to track them and to monitor them. We have a tool in SWEP that was developed for that purpose, and that tool is constantly pulling data from which we can pull reports. We actually do pull quarterly reports, share that with management, and through that process, if there's any outreach that needs to happen, or if there's any action that is required, we follow through. And again, the performance results are categorized as green, yellow, or red. So obviously we want it always to be green, and generally it is green. We for the most part, meet or exceed our performance measures. On this page, the A and B compliance with NEPA and NEPA regulations. B is the QA/QC for NEPA decisions, very important process that you all are integrally involved in at the local level, and that we play a pretty big role here at the state level as well, and that SWEP is a huge part of that. Federal Highway finally recognized that SWEP, it's programmed in such a way that it can catch, for example, when there's a need for documentation or you have to provide information, you're prompted to do so. You're prompted to upload the documentation, that sort of thing. So that's a very powerful QA/QC tool for us that's been recognized as a best practice by Federal Highway. Next slide. The performance measures also have C and D, relationship with agencies and the general public. We actually do have a measure for our relationship with agencies through the ETDM survey process. We have questions dealing with communications and how the interaction between us and the agencies are, which provides annual data. And then the last one is increase efficiency and timeliness. And I mentioned earlier, we generally, when that data was produced last year, we were exceeding that goal of 25. And this year we're just about there, only 1 point off. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to touch a bit on the pre-audit activities, and this is before Federal Highway arrives. Next slide. So we have specific roles, and we like to touch on them, particularly for the ones of you who are new to this process and to the audit that is underway. The roles are shown there in front of you. Obviously, OEM, as relates to NEPA, provides oversight, policy, direction, and guidance, and programmatic support. OEM has a final authority, approval authority for NEPA environmental documents that come up through the districts and to us. And it used to be that Federal Highway had that decision authority, and now the authority rests with FDOT, and OEM is the office, the director is the final approval point. Office of General Counsel plays an integral role in everything we do. They obviously provide legal sufficiency reviews, which is a part of our MOU and required for certain documents. Excuse me. And OGC also provides assistance with policies and procedures, preparing the administrative record. If litigation is to occur, they cover all of that. So they play an absolute integral role in everything we do. And the districts, you all follow the PD&E manual in developing and reviewing environmental projects, and your technical analysis, conducting your QA/QC, and creating and maintaining project files in SWEP. And over the years, with SWEP being the central location for official documentation for the projects, everybody has just done an amazing job. It was a growing process. We did have documentation out there all around, but SWEP is that location to put all that information, and you all have just done an incredible job, and we continue to grow in that regard. And the districts work with OEM, obviously. Each district has a PDC, has an engineer, an engineering staff person assigned. So, there's the districts work with us as the lead agency, which is a role that OEM assumes. And you work with obviously directly with the project files and the project reviews. And obviously the type ones, the districts approve those, but you input that information into SWEP so that we have complete information and records in SWEP. Next slide. So the Audit Authority, obviously it comes from the Federal Code 23 USC Section 327G and the NEPA Assignment MOU Part 11. And that gives Federal Highway the authority to audit. They've been doing it every year. The requirement was for 4 years, and this is the 4th and final year. And as Jason mentioned at the very beginning, that process starts, but then we go into what's called monitoring. We continue with the self-assessments, and that's going to be a different look, a different process. The audits up to this point have been used for annual reporting that Federal Highway is required to do to Congress. And obviously they track their findings. If they have non-compliance and have issued a request for actions, then they use that process to track and then to make sure that we are taking the action and making the changes that they've requested. Next slide. So the scope of the 2020 audit, obviously the date period is from May 1st, 2019 to April 30th, 2020. We have used that exact same date range for the self-assessment for obvious purposes because we can look at the same projects that they are looking at. The audits also will include consideration of our staffing, technical competency, and organizational capacity. They always request, we've already provided, and you all have given those to us in order for us to provide the org charts, and that's one of the things that they routinely will look at. They also look at adequacy of financial resources committed by the department to administer NEPA, quality control and quality assurance, the performance measures and compliance with MOU requirements. Also compliance with federal laws and policies in administering their responsibility. And again, their focus topics include environmental certification, authorizations, permitting, project reviews, and process improvements. Next slide. It's really important. We just want to kind of emphasize preparing in advance. And you all are doing a great job with that because just by attending this meeting, this is a major part of preparing for the audits. It's very important that you all understand the process, what Federal Highway is looking at in terms of their topics, their approach, and you certainly are doing that. We had a briefing on the self-assessment just a couple of days ago. Again, a very important thing to do is to tune in and to be involved in that process. We have district contacts in every district and in Florida Turnpike, folks who have been involved with this process from year one are absolutely incredible, very knowledgeable. It's your local contact and they know exactly what to expect, how to prepare, and how to advise anybody who is on the interview list. So we're very excited and very proud to serve beside them as we routinely go through this process. In fact, we have meetings every 2 or 3 weeks. So that's a big part of preparing. Training for any of you all who are new. We do have training videos posted at our website. They're short. They're not intended to drag on. They're professionally done. OIT has done an incredible job of putting those together for us. And we have them on just about any aspect that you might want to learn a little bit more about. So we certainly invite you all to tune in and to go to the links that are provided, go into a little bit more detail, especially if you haven't gone through this process before. Those of you who have done it before, they're always good as refreshers, but if you have never done it, those would be good just to take a little bit of time out of your schedule and to go to those training websites. And to kind of get all the training in one place, if you go to the FDOT OEM website, it's all there. So we have the link as part of this presentation. But if you go to the FDOT and you go to OEM, Environmental Management, we have a page of nothing but training and NEPA training, and all the links are there. Next page. So how do you prepare for the audit? In addition to this statewide meeting and training courses from previous slides, just be familiar with project specifics, projects that you've worked on. It's always good to kind of refresh as relates to that. If you manage or support financial authorizations, other areas that we are going to be looking at, permitting especially, just your knowledge in that regard. You don't have to dig through anything and find out anything new, but you all are the ones that have been doing the permitting. You all are the ones that have been doing the authorizations. And so just to have that knowledge and just to be aware that there could be questions relating to that. Reviewing and supporting documentation through the SharePoint, I just mentioned that. And then we have the audit prep interviews. Very, very, very important. We set those interviews up over the years. People who have gone through that process have found that they've been very helpful. We continue to have them. They kind of give you like a preview of what you may be seeing in the actual federal highway audit. We certainly pull questions from all the different things that we just mentioned to you as part of this presentation. And that's all coming up next week. So for those of you on the interview list, you've already been extended invitations. Just please attend and be open to that process. It's a very good process. And we've gotten good feedback in past years that the audit prep interviews are very helpful. And those are coming up next week. Next slide. So what to expect in terms of interview questions, and we kind of touched on this already, so I'm not going to really repeat it, but the questions could come from so many different places: the file reviews, self-assessment, the pair. You all will be fine as you kind of move through this process. It's a lot of information, but we are getting it out to you. Between this and those audit prep interviews, everybody will be fine. And plus, we're going to share with you this presentation. We're going to send it by email after this statewide meeting. And we also have a website set up. Again, the credit due to our district contacts. They suggested a year ago that we create a SharePoint site for people so that all of the information is in one location and you can just pull it up on your computer. You don't have to try to create a folder or a file separate on your computer for this, and we have done that, and we'll be sure to send you that link. The last thing on this is just answer based upon your knowledge and information that you know already. You're the expert, not Federal Highway. They're going to be asking you questions, but you're the expert, so kind of keep that in mind. The audit initiation activities, excuse me. Federal Highway obviously does a lot of job in the months building up to September. They basically have been going full speed since really since before May 1st. They gained access to the files and records on May 1st. They certainly have been going through those projects. They do have access to the ones within that date range. And even before then, they had a formal sit down in April with us to kick off the 2020 audit. So yes, they have been looking at the PD&E manual. They always review the MOU so that they have the information current and in front of them. They always look at previous audits. That's why we prepared the update on all the findings and what we've done with enhancements, training, and other activities relating to those previous findings. They look at the pair responses, the self-assessment, and they have all that information going into the September 21st and 22nd interviews. Then obviously we've conducted a self-assessment and we've provided responses to the pair and to the file reviews. Next slide. So this part, I'm at the end of mine. I see that there may be some questions in the chat box, so I'm going to kind of move over there and turn it over to Pete. And if there's something I can respond in the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So at this time, I turn it back over to Pete.
Great, thanks, Eric. So at this point, you've gotten a good history. You got a really good foundational understanding of kind of where we're at today, what are the products we've already produced. We're going to give you guys access to all of those various things. I think one of the key takeaways out of that entire discussion is there's lots of things FHWA is going to look at, and they may ask questions from any one of those sources. But for you, your job is always the same, what you normally do and what you're responsible for. And anytime you get a question from FHWA, it truly just needs to be from your perspective and your understanding of where things are. Don't feel like you need to guess. Don't feel like you need to expand. Just if you're responsible for something and you have a good understanding of it, then you can share from your perspective. But to kind of hit on something that Jason said very early on, which is it's okay if you don't know. It's totally fine. And they'll expect that as well. So let's just quickly go through the what happens during an audit. And so some of the things you're going to see on here, and you already have been probably shared the list before, but this is the list of the FHWA audit team members. When you get connected on the team's invitation, it will be a subset of these folks. They've broken up into various teams, and each one of those teams are going to go through interviews on various teams rooms throughout the course of those 2 days. So these are the folks that are going to be there. In the districts, you also have many of the folks are on this call, but we have audit contacts in the district. So in addition to Eric and in addition to me or Jason, if you guys have questions, here's some local resources who have been participating in our meetings, understand the logistics. Many of them are on this call right now. But these are individuals you can feel comfortable with reaching out and asking any questions, and they'll make sure that you guys are on steady footing and feeling good about everything. So we have lots of resources out there. Let's talk about the interview itself. At the very beginning, I put up the big list of where everybody is, what group they're going to fall in. Is it going to be a 30-minute interview? Is it going to be a 40-minute interview? So just make sure you're really comfortable with the idea of what your interview date and time and location is. Location, it's all teams, so just make sure you know where the link is. I believe I saw Joe send out Teams invitations to everybody. They were kind of following up on that to make sure that people accepted the meetings, and there was a subset of you that we needed to just a follow-up meeting, because FHWA was literally keeping track to say, did this person accept it? Did they not accept it? And anybody who hadn't accepted the meeting, we just followed up with them with a gentle nudge to make sure that they did. Of course, from our perspective and theirs, let's be really respectful about time. If you're supposed to start at 10, make sure you're ready to go right at 10 o'clock. These interviews are short. Actually, if you participated in the first couple of years, the interviews, the short ones were an hour, some of them were 2 hours. So having 30 minutes and then 45 minutes is a big process improvement through the years. If you have any kind of issues, your internet doesn't, we're all working remotely. If the internet's not working, things aren't going well, reach out to your district contacts, reach out to Eric, reach out to myself. All of the teams meetings should be updated with a teleconference line. FHWA's expectation is that you only use that teleconference line as a last resort. They're expecting it to be a Teams communication, that your camera is going to be on and that you guys are all going to be looking back and forth. The way it's going to work is they're going to have a couple of people on their interview team. Most likely the questions are all going to come from one, maybe two people, and then somebody else will actually be taking notes from their team. What we've seen in the past, it's usually from one person. Sometimes it'll be a couple of people alternating between questions on there. So just make sure you're ready. You're looking at the camera, you're presentable on everything. Again, that conference line is a backup. They really don't want you to use it unless you have to, but the world happens, internet happens, everything happens. If something happens, you need to use it. Don't be afraid to use it. Just let us know after, shoot us an email or something. And know whether you got the 30 minutes or the 45. And then after you go through the interview itself, so you're going to sit there, they're going to ask you questions, you're going to answer from your perspective, they're going to take notes, they're going to maybe ask some follow-up questions, but the meetings will last. So if they're going to be 30 minutes, they're going to be done at 30 minutes. They may be done sooner. If they're 45 minutes, they're going to be done at 45 minutes. They're not going to hold any of you guys longer. So whatever the length of time is that you're being interviewed, then that's the length of time it'll be. After all that, after you finish the interview, we're going to have a debrief Teams line set up where we're asking everybody after you finish the interview to come back and jump onto the Teams and just, we want to hear about your experience. How did it go? How did you feel? What types of questions? Those types of things. It's going to be a great debrief line. You don't need to be there long. Usually we finish in 5-10 minutes after the calls, just to kind of get a quick dump of everything. I say that because in years past, we've also had, and everybody's welcome to, that line's going to be open and it's designed for folks to come back and debrief. But because it's open, we also, in many cases, have folks that say, oh, I'd like to kind of hear what the questions are, from FHWA and stuff. And so they'll come and actually participate. And previously, it was a go-to meeting. This time it'll be Teams. And they just get on there and they stay on mute and they just listen to the conversation. And if they have any last-second questions, they let us know. It's going to be manned by myself and Kat Tulin and maybe some other folks from legal, maybe Eric as well. But there'll be a good team that's their whole entire job is to just be there on the line. Other than when some of us are being interviewed, I think we'll be there at 100%. So just wanted to provide that. Just some quick interview tips, right? And we've kind of brought some of this stuff up before, and it's the idea of know your role and be prepared to talk about it. You don't need to be prepared to talk about everything, but some of the things that we showed you at the beginning of this presentation was to make sure that you've heard it. There are performance measures. There is a QA/QC plan. Things like that there's a pretty, do you know the details about all that stuff? No, you don't need to know that, but you need to know those things exist. Another thing that we recognize is just be really careful listening to the question that the auditor asks and don't assume the question, like, oh, they really intended this, and then you expand in a completely different way. Just really kind of think through what they're asking you. And if you're not clear, ask a follow-up question and ask them to clarify for you. That's completely fine. It's okay to say, I don't know. Take your time when you're going to respond. Try not to pontificate on things. Just they ask you a question, try to think through the answer and be as concise as possible. Again, if you're not sure about stuff, ask for clarifications. And, we keep talking about this, but, provide the answer based on your role and experience. One of the things we do notice is that as folks, we move around in the agency and we're very familiar with this program, and then we get promoted and we move over to this program, and somebody asks us a question about this program, and we might be very familiar with it, but it also may be a few years since we actually did this. So think about those questions. Just because you used to do that, but you don't do it today, you might not be the most appropriate person to give a State of the Union response on this program, because things may have changed and there's individuals who are responsible for that. So just kind of think about that. And we're going to go through all this stuff individually between our legal team and each one of you guys as we go through the interview prep things. A few other tips and takeaways, make sure we're listening to the question. Don't guess, ask for clarification. Don't assume you know the answer. It's okay to think, so take your time, think about stuff. Pausing is great. I don't know, you'll notice that's a theme we keep saying, because if you don't, because one of the tactics we've seen is they'll ask a question and then they'll stay silent. And a lot of times when you stay silent, someone feels the obligation that they need to provide an answer. And so if you need to provide an answer and you don't know, then the right answer you're providing is I don't know. Just don't guess. Don't volunteer information. Don't think you know what's going on. Don't assume that you understand what their question is going to be. Ask for clarification, because you will find that FHWA, especially since a lot of their team members aren't even from Florida, they're actually from other states, or they're from headquarters, or they're from the resource office. They may not really talk about things in Florida the same way that we think about things. So they may ask a question that's more global, the way they're thinking about it. It might be more specific in Florida. And so you think, oh, well, I think they really mean this. And you could be right, but ask for the clarification ahead of time. And usually there'll be a Florida representative on the team anyway, and they'll come back and clarify as well. And then always, polite, answer truthfully, all that is, expected all throughout. And then just kind of coming through the last couple of slides as we kind of bring things into a landing, and we talk about the post-audit. The same week, so the week of the 21st, so the 21st and the 22nd is when FHWA audit team members are going to do all their remote interviews with everyone. They're going to do it with central office, OEM staff. They're going to do it with the Office of General Counsel. They're going to do it with all of the districts. They're going to talk to the permitting folks. They're going to talk to the leadership folks. They're going to talk to the management folks on that Monday and Tuesday. They also are having interviews with other agencies as well, because they're checking on our relationships and making sure things are going well. And we know at a minimum, they're going to talk to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they're going to talk to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's probably 3 or 4 others that they're going to talk to as well. Then they're going to get together and kind of figure out, well, what did they find? What do they think? What was confirmation? What do they have a non-compliance? Do they potentially have some opportunities? Do they have some successful practices? And at the end of that week, of the 21st, that Friday morning, they're going to come back and they're going to share what their initial findings are. And then they're going to go underground and they're going to start drafting their actual report. And that could take months, several months. We've seen it speed up in the last year, but we've also seen it take, a year and a half to get some responses. So it could be a bit. So they'll draft that till they get to a point where they're ready to share that with us. Then they'll share it with us internally and allow us to have some responses back on their pre-draft. Then they'll actually take the draft and they'll make it available on the public, the Federal Register, and make it publicly available and open for comments. And once that completes, they'll have those comments, and then they'll go to reconcile those things. And then ultimately, once those comments are all reconciled with us, with the public and everything else, then they'll publish the final report in the Federal Register as well. One of the things we did talk about was this is the last year for the audit. So we have the 5-year NEPA assignment agreement. It required the first 4 years to include audits, and the 5th year we switched to monitoring. This is the 4th of 4 years for auditing. So we are going to be switching to monitoring. I can't tell you exactly what that process is going to look like at this point. It won't be auditing, but it's probably more than just what we already do in the self-assessment. but we're working actively with them to figure out what that means. I don't know whether or not they'll still be doing program reviews on a special area in addition to our self-assessments. I'm not sure what that's ultimately going to look like. But that's kind of where we're going from here. So next week, we've got you guys for the individual specific legal prep audit interview practices. We're going to work on those all individually. We're going to give you this PowerPoint. We're going to give you this recording. We're going to give you guys, copies of the pair and all that stuff, the links to the training and all of those various elements. We're going to have a Teams meeting set up for all the debrief. You guys are welcome to listen in real time. At a minimum, after you go through it, we want you to come back and debrief with us. That would be great. But if you want to get a leg up on, what they might be asking you, feel free to do that. One of the things, while I've got you guys and we just have a couple more minutes, if your management or your leadership, one of the things we have heard from FHWA is that 3 years ago, one of the things they did at the leadership and management level was they asked questions relative to what types of benefits would you expect to receive taking on NEPA assignment. And we have heard from Florida division that they're going to ask similar questions this year to kind of, okay, here's what you're hoping you're going to get out of it. Now they're going to ask you what you got out of it. They're probably going to ask a lot of those benefits related questions. What are the actual benefits and things like that? So I think that's going to be one of the tenors for this. And I think with that, it's open for questions. I haven't looked at the chat to see if there's stuff there. Okay, I'm not seeing any specific questions. Will they be allowed to record the interviews? No, they're not recording the interviews. That was one of the questions that came in from Gwen. They're not recording the interviews. And Ed, I see your notice about the new hire. I'll come and talk to you after this. And I saw Eric responded to John about us posting all this stuff after. Yep. Any other questions while we've got you guys? It took pretty much the whole time. We appreciate you. Anything else I can answer while I'm here right now? Otherwise, we'll be seeing each other next week to go through things individually. All right, not seeing anything come in through the chat. Thank you all. I hope you have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.